announcements. One is that there's plenty of seats up here. If anybody wants to come forward, I'll just talk for a second and it won't be awkward for anybody if you want to come up front. Use the app. The app's great. Someone messaged me right after my opening remarks and said, let's meet. That's awesome. Also, you probably know AES is trying to pay us to go to the booths with the sticker game. So play the sticker game because you could win some awesome prize. But next up, we've got a panel. Let's see, what next? How to advance and scale XR projects. So sticking with the theme of how do we scale, I'm going to introduce our panel moderator, Eric Abbruzzese. Eric is a research director at ABI Research, focused on AR, MR, and VR. So let's welcome Eric to the stage.
Thank you, everybody.
So I assume, unless you tell them.
Thanks, everybody, for joining. I am Eric Abbruzzese, Research Director with ABI Research. Hopefully you've seen my name somewhere. If not, I'm not doing a very good job of being an XR market research leader.
Let's go.
I'm going to keep my introduction very short because we have 5 true experts here, and they can speak way more confidently than I can. So let me get my introductions in order. We have Nobel Vale, Principal Scientist with Bristol Squibb. We have Scott Burkey, Technology Fellow, XR for WestRock. We have J.B. Farge, Global XR Manager with Subsea 7. Timm Otto with Airbus, a Technical Specialist for Mixed Reality. And we have James Del Rossi, Lead Mobile Solutions Architect and Technology Manager for Dow. So, like I said, these guys are true experts. I will keep my comments relatively minimal and let them take the majority of it. We're going to be talking about, as Vishal mentioned, how are we scaling right now? I think most of us would agree that XR is mature enough to scale, and we'll talk a little bit about maturity here. But what does it take? What are the barriers and accelerators? What does your company need to consider if you're not considering it already? If you are considering things, what's next? And we'll go through all of that today. So I think I will start off and keep it really straightforward, top level. Nobel, what are you doing right now in XR?
So, thanks everyone for being here today. My name is Nobel, and I've been in Bristol Squibb for a little over 10 years now. And around 2018, we started an initiative where my management came to me and said, let's look at the idea of looking at augmented reality or virtual reality in the lab space. And it was more of an ideation. And from that time, we started pilot programs. We had different types of technology that we looked to implement. AR, VR. We worked with some close partners such as Apprentice.io on doing initial implementation, and that has expanded towards the idea during the pandemic where we enabled a lot of remote collaboration when people couldn't travel, going to other manufacturing sites in pharmaceutical companies where we needed that support. And then once that happened, leadership came to us and was like, what else can we do with this technology? So this expanded to looking at mixed reality, VR, and things like that, where we could look at things such as immersive training, look at ways of innovating how we capture data and store data. And it has just kept expanding. A lot of other groups within our company have adopted a lot of these technologies, and we've been scaling up, nonstop since then.
Excellent, thank you. Scott?
So what we're doing right now is we're really in this mode of going from a base set of tools that we used to just kind of put out the fire and just cover our factories and our company with XR where needed. We're in this mode now of, and I think this is a great panel to be on because we're in the mode of how do we perhaps upgrade or change tools to be able to expand further. It's a little bit different deal to do, we did it well in a lot of cases in North America, but now as we go into Europe, China, South America, it's a little bit different flavor there. And so we're in the process of how do we take what we did well in a small fashion and then scale it out. Are the same tools and processes that we used in North America going to work for us in other countries? Spoiler alert, maybe, maybe not, right? And so a lot of what we're doing is just looking at how we learn from what we've done and start to move globally within our organization.
Absolutely. Yeah, that global movement's, I think, becoming increasingly important, and we'll get into those global differences in a bit. JB, what's going on?
Yeah, so I'm JB Farge. I work for Subsea 7. In layman terms, we are the plumbers of the sea, as I like to introduce the company to people. And one thing that I want to do before I start to explain where we're at now, by a show of hand, how many XR practitioners do we have in the room, as in people who introduce immersive solution in their company? Out of this show of hands, how many people, keep them up. How many people have one or more immersive solution in pilot? Okay. How many of you guys have pilot that are scaled to at least 30% of your workforce? Those hands that are still up, look around and talk to these guys as well. Because it's not only just us. So like, there's so many people around in this forum that are nice to talk to, and you realize just by these things that it's hard. It's hard to scale. It is hard to get that mass adoption. Just like I remember one of the speakers yesterday, like, we are not mass adopting. And so where we are at now with Subsea 7 is like we started with design reviews in virtual reality. We realized that using headset was not the best way for our engineers to do it. And they were very much more receptive of being collaboratively in a cave system where they could be together and collaborate in that way. And so this is what we're trying to replicate now. How do we have one region, the Gulf of Mexico, where I'm located at, that is doing that, and then we're looking at replicate that in other regions so far. So this is where we are.
Excellent, Jay. Thank you. Tim.
Yeah, hi, thanks for having me here. So I'm Timm, Otto, work for Airbus now since 2019. I'm located in Hamburg, Germany, and I'm right now the digital architect for ground support equipment, coming back to that, what this means. But since 2019, I'm in contact with XR technology, mainly for productional use, so on our shop floor. So my main mission was there to not only investigate new use cases and ways how we can take advantage of this technology, but also being the face to the customer and investigate together with them how we can bring their ideas to life, because we appreciate that a lot of our employees see a lot of potential in this technology, basically, which I highly appreciated. So, but I also work together with our engineers and a community of practice to evolve and bring the XR technology industrial, which is a big thing that needs to be discovered through our past years. We spent a lot of energy in this to really master the technology in the past years. I was also working as an application manager for one of the Airbus own developed mixed reality software or applications that we are using on our shop floor, as well as now recently becoming the digital architect for our ground support equipment. So that means I'm building up a digital strategy to discover how we can bring new values with our tools that we deliver alongside with our aircraft to airlines and MROs to maintain and operate our aircraft on ground. So we see that also from our airlines and real customers, we have a strong requirement or interest in this technology. So I'm really putting my hand in my power now in this, investigating further.
Excellent. Great, appreciate it. James, what are you and Dow up to right now?
So James Rossi, working at Dow's Digital Operations Center, which is an internal technology vetting organization for manufacturing, focused on specifically mobility and how can we digitize our operators, our workforce. Large focus on infrastructure, hardware and software, and culture, and how to actually change that culture to get adoption. So our XR journey really started around 2017. We looked at all the different technologies that were out there. We tried everything. We brought them to end users. Some things stuck, some things did not. What we realized was we had a foundation problem. We had to really fix, not Band-Aid, but fix are the core pillars that are required for mobile solutions. So infrastructure was a huge one. Dow's facilities are large, chemical manufacturing facilities, right? Just very large square footage, RF nightmares, lots of metal, things like that. And so right now we're working on a lot of like privatized cellular and just ways to get data into these facilities, because we realized a lot of the things we wanted to do and the speed at which we wanted to run with mobility and devices, we couldn't do without that infrastructure. We couldn't do it without software that made sense for our end users. We couldn't do it without devices that were ergonomic, that integrated into our PPE, that made sense, that weren't frustrating to our end users. It's really this interesting cacophony of bringing all that together. And we realized we couldn't actually achieve cultural adoption without all of that being in place. So our big focus right now is nailing those foundational pillars so that we can focus on winning the cultural war to actually get mass adoption.
Excellent, I appreciate it. That cultural war is a really interesting point. I'm going to come back to you on that when we talk integration. But so that has set the stage, if you will, for our panelists. Let's dive in a little bit. Top level still. Is XR mature enough to scale? I think I know the answer for most of you guys, but I'd like some specifics. Maybe James, let's start with you. It sounds like it is. What are the specifics you're looking at in terms of confirming that, and what might get in the way?
So I think there is, James.
James,
I told you, right?
I said James, I was looking at Scott, sorry.
Okay.
Let's start with James.
Yeah, so what are the, I mean, so you're asking what are the, like, is it mature enough to scale?
Yeah, so you mentioned those cultural differences. That's obviously
Yeah.
like a potential barrier. What are some of the accelerators, that would make you say it is or is not mature enough to scale?
So I would say, when we looked at our end users and what they need, the question I always have to ask is it required, right? Like, first of all, are we really solving a problem? Are we adding stuff? Like, is the technology let's just start with the hardware. The form factor of the hardware itself. Mm-hmm. Is it something that our end user is going to want to wear? I want to move away from session-based AR into something that somebody's going to wear the entire day, right? We've got people walking out of control rooms into a plant and doing their shift work 10 hours, long shifts out in Texas summers and Canadian winters, right? Mm-hmm. And ergonomics is a huge form factor. It's not just the hazards ratings in our industry and all the requirements around that. It's a lot of just general use to even make people want to pick it up and use it. Yeah. That's a frustrating piece. So you got to get past that piece first. And there are some devices that I think do a good job there. But if I went up to an operator and said, hey, put these glasses on and don't use your phone or tablet anymore. Oh, and you have to speak to it. And there's a compressor running at 115 decibels, right? It's like all those things start to become issues that it's a technical challenge. Oh yeah, wear this tether and put it in your pocket. Like all that stuff they have to manage. And it can be really difficult to even get in the door with some of this technology so that they'll actually want to use it. I mean, you'll have people that are going to be your cultural champions, your local champions. Oh, this is the coolest thing ever. I want to use this. And you need to start with them, I think. But really, we need to make sure the product is physically ready and capable. Yeah. That's a big issue.
Yeah, absolutely. JB, I think Subsea 7 has an interesting perspective on environmental challenges, let's say. Can you speak on that? Is there anything that really accelerates from an environmental perspective this adoption? And then, is it sort of a double-edged sword with also potentially slowing it down?
I don't think it's key, but there is some, so I'm going to resonate with some of what James just shared. One of the thing that I didn't hear mentioned a lot is about 3 panelists out of this group have glasses, right? So that within the form factor of your end user on the field that has to wear something, it's like, this is something that we have to talk about, and it's not easy to get that adopted. Do I wear my glasses? Do I not wear them? Can I actually use it? Does it create some kind of mists? Like I have to clean my glasses every so often. So, but to go back to your question, we are doing some works in the renewable side of things where we use that training in VR to train our different engineering teams to maintain and operate those operational offshore vessels. that are going out there in the offshore and to install those wind farms. So this is the way that we are tagged, that we are using that environmental challenge to create something with XR, but it's not key in terms of mass adoption. Like we are much more, I'm looking for internal efficiency, which is hard to sell sometimes because it's hard to, on a project that takes maybe like 2 years, yes, I'm going to save some times and therefore some money into the design if I'm doing collaborative design reviews, but that money is not saved at the end.
Yeah.
Because I'm using that time to do something else in the same path. So it's like, it's some kind of those soft ROI that are hard to quantify ultimately.
Absolutely. Nobel, I think the research and scientific side of things is very interesting. It's probably one we haven't heard too much about. Any specific thoughts coming from your point of view? You know, what's accelerating and what's keeping it from accelerating?
I think some of the biggest things that help it accelerate is the idea of working with the business on use cases that are real world experiences that can potentially get AR, VR, MR out there into the market. Because at the same time, the business is the one that's driving it. The end users are going to be the one using it, as many of these panelists said. And there's many things within the different devices and technologies that can be limiting to people that aren't as tech savvy. And I think we need to make sure that we institute steps that end users will see it as, okay, you're adding a step to log in or scan a barcode or do one of these things, but it's going to save me 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes in the long run. And it's also important to make sure that, you know, I'm just one person. And I think as you navigate through your company and you find people that can be advocates for this technology, they're going to be your biggest team players in helping scale up throughout the company. Because they work in different groups, they have different needs, and they can work with your partners into developing different use cases. And in parallel, you want to make sure that depending on each site, they might have different infrastructure needs, Wi-Fi needs, connectivity needs, that you want to make sure are done in parallel. So when you're ready to scale up, everything is ready. So in summary, there's a lot of team players that you want to make sure that are involved and are advocates of the technology so they can further provide good implementation in your company.
Perfect. Scott and Tim, I want to throw it to you guys, whichever has the most emphatic opinion on this. Manufacturing, I think, was kind of first to the ball game in terms of looking into how can we adopt XR, you know, getting remote assistance and training and really minimizing that downtime. Aerospace and manufacturing, you know, equally. I remember some big names, Airbus being one, that was early to the game. Has that proven advantageous as we're looking into true scale right now? You know, has those early adoption phases that maybe those players, the manufacturing players, have been doing, has that proven out? Have there been lessons learned?
Right.
And what are those lessons going forward?
Scott, do you want to go first? I mean, I can answer that from my perspective. So when it comes to scaling, like disruptive technology, we can call it like that, or from my point of view in our industry, traveling by plane is one of the most secured ways of getting from A to B. And this comes along with the high standards we have in the aircraft industry, building our aircrafts. So product safety and product quality is something that is one of the key values, the highest values that we have within our company. So if you're changing the mature processes in our company, you have to ensure that new technology that you bring in still maintain the high standards that we have. If this is not possible, you really need to discuss how you can make it happen if you want to make it happen, if that makes sense for you. And it goes even further. If we also want to equip our workers and employees with these head-mounted displays or techno, we also have to ensure within our production area health and safety standards. So everything comes together when it comes on how can we change our really mature and well-designed production processes. During the past years in our XR journey, we have seen that we definitely identified a lot of good use cases and ways how XR can improve our overall everyday work when it comes to inspection, quality processes, even some installation processes, and especially during COVID, also bringing maybe a customer nearer to our production area when with remote assistance. So clearly we can see there is value, but I can also see that when it comes to scaling up, hardware is, and both of you already mentioned it, is also a key point in this. And if I look right now on the devices available on the market, I have still some concerns about the durability of the devices. So don't get me wrong, but our production area is sometimes a quite rough environment. So does one of these devices, if you equip these devices, do they survive a drop of 2 or 3 meters? And if they break, how to repair or even bring them into service in a very short time? Do you have to replace the full device and then even set up it again and all this stuff? Or is it possible to easily repair the display? How about changing the batteries if the lifetime goes to end after maybe 2 hours or something like this? How about hygiene? If we are sharing the devices between different employees. All these are, I think, aspects on the hardware side that are still not there in a way that we say it's fully mature to scale up in a big range, or at least that we still need to be very, or that we really need to look very specific on this, how to train and how to work with these devices in order to let them survive longer than 3 months. So this is really something that bothers me a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. Hardware is a very interesting topic, especially with, obviously this is Augmented Enterprise Summit, so consumer, it takes a bit of a back seat, but there's a lot of devices in the pipeline. And some of them will be really good for enterprise with good battery life, good displays, good ease of use, and some of them will be really bad for enterprise because they're not rugged and they're not ready for those environments. But it's a very interesting dynamic where that consumer market starts to come into play a little more importantly. Scott, do you have anything that you don't agree with there?
No, I mean, I was just thinking about this. I mean, as my friend Tim was talking, I spent a lot of time just running around. I felt like I'm trying to hold a gallon full of marbles in my hands, and it's tough with regards to what device is making what advancement in software and who just bought who and who went under and who's got the hot hand right now. And it's crazy. I tell people this all the time. I used to think that, I say used to, so long ago, like, 3-4 years ago. Back in the olden days, 4 years ago, I used to think that the cool devices and stuff would just sell itself, and I could just go in with a device and people would just go crazy, and I was going to look like this hero. But I tell you what I've seen is that it's, and JB, you and I have talked about this, man. It's really just not about the technology as much as it is about I've gotten better at ferreting out and just kind of qualifying the use cases and the places where I'm going to put the technology in place, because it's, like I said, I used to think that I could just go out and people were going to just love the stuff and it was just going to just take off and I was just going to sit back and watch it spread around the world. But what's really happened is that I've gotten better at putting the right device and the right software combination in the right place for the right use case with the right people. And that's what I think I'm kind of optimistic about, because I don't see us getting down to one device and one software platform for every factory globally, maybe ever. And so I think it's, we spend a lot of time, guys like us and ladies in XR, we spend a lot of time talking more so about people and building relationships and spending time in the plants, working alongside frontline workers. That's probably the smartest thing we do. It's not gushing over cool devices. And so it's, I think it's really a people deal. It's because the technology will drive you nuts. I mean, it's all over the place.
And I think so. If you take a step back and you think about what went well in a project that scaled, and those who raised your hands, just make sure you raise your hands again, just to make sure we know who you are. But like, if I look back at my experience, like it would be sort of buy-in sandwich, right? So like, so you have the buy-in from management, but you have the buy-in of your end users as well. So you have both. You have a clear value proposition, which means you know what your problem is, which XR happens to be the tool, but like if it wasn't XR, it would be something else, right? You have you know how to manage the expectation of both the end users and your management, and so it almost has to become that viral thing, like organic. It kind of take off. Like sometimes there is one initiative in my company, like the reality capture, 3D scanning, kind of took off on its own better than I was hoping for. So sometimes you don't know what's going to actually be successful. You can hope for things, but some stuff that I was very hopeful, just like Scott was like mentioning, it's like, oh, this is going to do it. Yeah, I know this is going to be successful, and like big flop. So it's sometimes, so again, looking back and chiming in, like what else do you guys would see on things that went well? What else do you guys would add?
One thing that you just said that resonated with me is that sometimes you don't know what's going to really like go off and run. Mm-hmm. And we had originally brought XR into the company for manufacturing, and we hit a lot of like cultural adoption issues. Mm-hmm. Because just in the digital, yeah, right, of course. But raise your hands again. But the where we had a lot of success, and we didn't expect it, was dealing with our customers, and like shipping them devices for customer support. And that, I mean, during COVID, that really took off, right? I mean, it's the remote collaboration use case. That's an easy one. But I didn't go into this journey expecting that to be successful at all. In my company, I was like, well, I don't need that. We send people on airplanes to go do that. Like that's not an issue. But all of a sudden, you can't travel anymore, and it's a big deal, right? And so now it's just, I guess my thought there is, you might think it's going to work for something in your organization, your company, and you might be surprised when you start talking to people about it and getting it in other people's hands internally that they may have other use cases you never considered. Mm-hmm. And I think finding those use cases is really the hardest part.
Yeah.
My plan is written in pencil. I used to write it in Sharpie, and now it's in pencil because it changed.
Yeah.
So on that note, we've talked about a human element which has infinite variables. We've talked about some environmental elements that could have infinite variables. Then there's existing infrastructure which could have infinite variables. Mm-hmm. So there's these three pillars that, when you're writing in Sharpie, are impossible to plan for. How do you integrate into these? And Nobel, I guess I'll start with you. Is integration really necessary to get off the ground and scale? And what are you integrating into in terms of existing infrastructure, IoT, PLM, whatever it may be?
Yeah, I think it really depends on the use case that you're looking at, right? And the location of where the technology is being used, because you can have people that are advocates, you can have the business that are bought in, but then if you don't have the infrastructure of internet connectivity or high level of connection, then your use case is going to flop, right? So it's important to see that who is originating this use case. Is it the end users? Is it the business? Or is it more on the IT side, right? Because if the business is originating it, then you want to make sure, for example, that you work closely with IT so they understand what your needs are. If there's infrastructure needs from IT or security side, they can work with you and assist in implementing that. So you can have a really good tangible use case and show real world impact on how you're going to implement this technology. If it's more on the IT side, for example, and they develop the infrastructure, then it's talking to the end users. The end users in this case are the customers. So you want to make sure you talk to them about what is the problem in your process? What's taking the longest time? What are the steps in the process that maybe from a technology standpoint, you could tell them, you could actually save 5-10 minutes if you do voice to text recognition, or automate some type of data capture that maybe the XR device can help provide. And when you look to empathize with the other party, that's where I think people can band together and make sure that we're all on the same page and more people are going to be advocates and really promote the technology throughout your company and network.
Excellent. James, do you have any additional thoughts? You know, I keep coming back to you for that cultural element. I think you phrased it really well. How does that interweave with, you know, culture, people, places, things, basically? How challenging can that be?
Now, this is a great question. I'm sorry, I'm thinking of all these examples. So one thing that's interesting, right, when you think about the culture around one area I didn't expect resistance was the culture on the support side internally. I remember the day I handed like a realware to like our IT folks, and they were like, you want me to manage this? You can't enter a password into this. How do you do this, right? And we had to, again, going back to that foundational comments earlier, we had to completely change the way that we managed these devices. Our entire mobile strategy changed, right? And it was all the back end stuff that's less attractive, but you had to get that right, because otherwise you've got end users that are going to, and if you're going to completely digitize and say you're not using paper anymore, now you're using a phone or tablet, and then you say, oh wait, no, now you're not using that anymore, you're going to use this AR headset, it has to be dependable. So it has to be supported. We needed a 24/7 support. We needed all these things, because at the end of the day, if somebody's trying to make a call in the middle of the night, you know, to somebody else across the world and using that remote collaboration use case and all of that capability, you needed that reliability. Mm-hmm. And that was interesting, because we had to transform culturally the way that we looked at digital tools and a lot of these tools in general. But I would say one of the biggest takeaways we had from an end user perspective on culture was integration into PPE as much as possible. So we already had end users that had to carry a lot of stuff, right? Gloves, hard hats, monogoggles, safety glasses, rebreathers, like all these, like we were wearing fire retardant clothing, like all that stuff, gas detection systems, radios. Like now you're saying to them, okay, look, yeah, I know you're wearing all that stuff and you're really uncomfortable, but like, here, this too. And that can be a real challenge sometimes. So what we've had a lot of, and just wearables across the board for a second, not even just XR, was the integration into the stuff they already had to carry. Say, okay, you know what? Hey, that radio you have, well, I'm going to replace it with this radio instead. So you're not adding, you're just replacing, you're augmenting, and you're getting additional capabilities, right? Or that hard hat you have to wear. Just snap this in. I mean, one of the things we really liked about some of those early AR devices is that we could flip them out of the way, because culturally it's non-intrusive design, right? And I think that was a huge cultural win for us when we had those devices. We found those devices, the right ones, that were there when you needed them and only when you needed them. And that's how I think you get into that, get away from the session-based systems and into something that can be carried and worn all day, all shift. So that was some of the little things that we learned culturally, I know, or helped us with the cultural adoption.
I appreciate that. My background's in human-computer interaction, and I've been covering this market long enough. I was driven up the wall looking at some of these early examples of technology for technology's sake, and what these devices were capable of, and just shoving it onto users, whether it made sense or not. So I'm glad that we're progressing past that and getting some human-friendly design, both in hardware and those supporting ecosystems. That's good to see. So I want to move on. Well, I don't want to move on. There's so much we could talk about, but I have to for time. I want to talk a little bit about data, security, validation, things like that. Nobel, I'll come back to you. Is data security and validation really important on that research and scientific side for you?
On a research and scientific side, absolutely, right? I work in a large biopharmaceutical company, so there's a lot of proprietary information. There's a lot of things that we want to make sure that there's no data breaches on. So that's also where I come back to say, the constant communication between the business and between IT is important, right? Because you can find a great technology, but you want to make sure that it's secure, right? And you need to work with IT to establish, how do I move forward with the use case, right? If there's any security things that have to be looked at, how do we maybe work on this offline, right? How do we still create a timeline where we can have good progression of our use case of what we can have as tangible evidence to show that there is benefit, right? And then when we look at digitizing a lot of this data, a lot of what we do in research, it's a lot of real-time data that's coming in. It's looking at different pressure gauges. It's looking at the amount of material that's going through different pipes or flows and things like that. So now we have more and more data that is coming in, because we're not looking at, for example, archaic things such as looking at a gauge, writing something down. Now we're able to get readings every second, every 5 seconds. How do we manage all that data that we have coming in? So outside of XR, now you're looking at how do you implement automation? And XR can then be seen as a complement of what you want to do in the long run. And when it's seen as a complement, a step, then that can be instituted in different projects, different objectives, where now management will have vision of the need and will make sure that people are accountable for how we look to progress appropriately throughout the network. And one thing I want to mention too is that was talked about is the idea that different sites look at different devices and have different needs. And it's important that we really look at what the end users want to do, because it can really affect what type of device that they would want to adopt. As we mentioned before, the things such as having something tethered or something that's unintrusive, those sometimes can be the deal breakers. You can have a great technology that comes down the pipeline, but if it has one of those things and the end users won't use it, then we have to really work with them and see what else is out there. So it's a whole slew of things that really you learn by experience.
Gotcha. Appreciate it. Any quick thoughts from anybody else on the panel?
There's one about like data, specifically like when you create your XR solutions, you create, yeah, we got it. So as you create, you start doing immersive solutions, XR solutions, and create, for instance, if I take VR scenarios or anything like that, you start creating data, and soon you realize that you're amassing data, and if you haven't thought of the data governance that goes around it, because at first you don't think of it, you're excited, you have a use case, yes, we have something done. But the data is going to start to accumulate, and if you don't think on how that data is going to integrate into your overall system, again, when it goes to scaling, to advance to the next level for your scale to scale is about how do you integrate to the overall process of your organization. So data governance for me, I'm trying to hammer this, sometimes 3D is an afterthought in my company because 3D data is usually treated as an output rather than as an input. And therefore, yeah, it's okay. We'll manage this. We'll manage this on the other hand. Well, but you start creating things with that data, so it's important that we have some kind of structure and ownership and QA and all of this. So there is a big part about data integration, I think. Yeah.
Excellent. So I should mention, since we're coming up close to time, we have about 7 minutes left. We probably won't have time for Q&A. The app is excellent. I've used a lot of bad conference apps. This is not one of them. So you can go on the app, ask us questions live. There's a couple questions posted by JB already. You can check out, or find us. I'll be on the floor all day today. So just as a heads up, since we won't probably get time for Q&A. All right. Last point I want to hit on is content. Where is it coming from? Who's creating it? And how important are partnerships? JB, maybe I'll stick with you. Where is the content coming from for you guys? Who's creating it? And what's that process look like?
Yeah, so we have still a bit of an echo right there. I'll try to go on. So for us, there is a vision of developing in-house capabilities. And that is, we have a lot of CAD knowledge experts. And so we want to give them the opportunity to create maybe a design review by themselves to actually engage within their projects. So we don't have to take their hand. We don't have to have a COE team, a Center of Excellence team could be a bottleneck to scale. So the idea is to take those individuals and upskill them as much as possible. If we were to go for, it all depends, of course, the answer, it depends. But for a company that do VR training, for instance, and if you have a lot of different facilities and you need to have that ad hoc, the bespoke training scenario, and that needs a lot of logic, and you don't have that resource in-house, then maybe you need to outsource it. And it very much, it depends on the vision that you have for what you want to do ultimately.
Right.
Yeah.
Tim, anything different? Would you align with that?
You mean in terms of in-house or doing?
Yeah, so for Airbus, what are you guys creating and where's it coming from?
Right. I mean, well, I think if you are on the decision whether you do your stuff on your own or put it to a third party, I think before you go to the decision, it is good to know that, or it is key to know that when you want to make this decision, you have to know that we know our product very well. We know our processes, we know how everything works, and this is not only for the product itself or aircraft, but also for all the tools that we are going to use. And that's the same for the XR technology from my point of view. If you want to make a decision whether you do it on your own or you let it develop by someone else, you have to take care at the end also about like building up the backlog of requirements. Who's going to tell you what are how the requirements would look like? So what we've done in the past is we really build up a community of experts that are able to answer the use cases, able to watch the market and to evaluate which technology is the right or the best for us. Then we can still make the decision whether we want to do it on our own or we want to push it out or outsource it. And if you then push it outside and you're expecting a good quality of your product. So you have to maintain really this set of requirements. The idea is to get the right product in the end. So I think it's key to have the experts in-house. Maybe not everything, but at least the core in order to evaluate what you want to do.
Right, appreciate it. Any final thoughts before we move on to our own final thoughts? No? Okay, guys, I'll go in order, I guess. What's your main takeaway from this panel? What would a recommendation be to someone who wants to work with your company or yourself? And what are really the key points to keep in mind? Nobel, let's start with you.
I think in terms of final thoughts, I know we look at companies that want to work with us and things like that. I think what's really important is this whole room is full of people that are advocates for this XR technology. And we're going to look to implement this technology in our companies. I think a biggest thing that a lot of people kind of overlook is once we implement the technology, once we roll it out, have a kickoff meeting, things like that, a lot of times we wipe our hands clean and think it's done. But to scale it up, it's to maintain that support when new users come in. You want to make sure that these people are set up for success, because if they're not, you're not going to scale up. You're not going to see an increase of users. You might slowly see the adoption of your technology go down because there's lack of support. So that's something I really want to emphasize, because I've seen many projects, I've heard many things from many people where they were able to kick off the technology, there was a lot of forward momentum, but then it fizzled out. And you want to look at yourself and say, how come it fizzled out? Was there a constant increase of did people not want to use it? Was there not a way of evolving the technology further? You want to make sure that you keep that momentum going so it can be successfully scaled up, and you have even more advocates, whether it's end users, senior leaders, and vice presidents, or people at the top that can look at this technology and say, it's not a toy, it's not something that's novel, it's actually providing impact, and we want to make sure it's adopted throughout the entire company.
Excellent. Scott?
Yeah, I think you really got to think this through. I was just thinking about this, how everybody loves to get a new puppy, and puppies are great for about 45 minutes, right? But you got to think this through, that you're going to have a teenager or adult dog at some point that's not going to be as cute and as Instagram worthy, perhaps, right? You got to think about that whole lifespan, and I feel like over the last few years, I got a whole box full of puppies, and now they're taking a lot of care and feeding and cleaning up after, and it's a lot of work. And I need people that are going to be with me to help me take care of these projects and these implementations and all the issues that come with that, because the new puppy high goes away very quickly. And so I'm looking for people, companies and partners and friends that we can help each other after the thrill is gone, so to speak, a month or a year later after putting something in place. Right. That's what I really need.
Not to mention the puppies are expensive, which doesn't help.
They are, yeah. There's vet bills.
Yeah.
Tell me about it.
Great. JB?
I think, just to resonate with what you guys said, I think manage expectation in terms of how soon do you think you're going to scale, and put that in the paper, and just it takes time, just like as we saw today. But like, try to quantify, like what would be a reasonable expectation of when am I going to reach that key of 30% of my workforce, right? And again, it's penciled out because it's never, shop is a high risk there. But yeah, I think that's pretty much what it boils down to. And yeah, Timm?
Excellent. Timm?
Totally agree on that, but I think I was like really looking for the past years for a recipe for scaling up really well, and that I can share with you, so you can like take it and say, hey, Timm said we're gonna do it like this, and it's gonna be fine. This is how we do it. And I think there's nothing like this because all the companies are really individually, and every company has its own like idea how to use the technology, but I think there are some key drivers for scaling up. So I think once and for all, the most important thing, and it took us also some time, but we're there, is to have XR part of your overall company strategy. Because if it's there, it means that you have the full support from your higher management. You do not need to argue about why you're doing this or that, why you need another money pot to spend on scaling up, because they trust in you, they trust in the technology, and they know, okay, that's gonna be helpful because you have evaluated the use cases that you want to do, and they bring value. But this is also even this is also not enough, and we have not talked too much about change management, but I think key driver here is the user in the end. He needs to accept it. He needs to understand why you want to do it in a certain way. You can have the best and mature and most sexiest technology and solution, throw it into the production. If the workers do not understand why they're doing it, why they have a benefit and they don't see a benefit of it, they're not going to use it. You're going to fail immediately, and you waste your money immediately. So we really need to go. Sorry.
No, that's okay.
But we really need to switch our side or our view on it from a more technical perspective to a psychology perspective. We have to deep dive into the brain of our users to understand what their everyday life looks like and what their everyday problems are, because these are the problems you want to solve in the end.
Right.
And there is a quote / joke about change management that I like to share sometimes. It's like, change management expectations are calculated in dog years. And we go back to the puppies, right? It's like, what you think is going to take 1 month takes 7 months.
Right.
So just bear in mind.
Absolutely. Yeah, change management, I think we could spend another 50 minutes on its own, but another time. James, bring us home.
Yeah, so I think for the companies in the room that are trying to adopt XR, my recommendation would be to fix your foundations. Don't Band-Aid them. Like really, I mean, that's all the comments you just heard in this closing absolutely, totally resonate. But one of the other things, to even start having that cultural discussion and change management, you need to have a good infrastructure, good connectivity, pick the right devices, right? Pick software that makes sense. Get all that ready, polish it up before you can even have that conversation. Because if any one of those 3 things isn't really good for your end user, your barrier to entry is higher, right? And so you don't want to put more work on yourself to try to win the cultural adoption war there. You need to make it as easy as possible. Already it's a challenge. So that would be my first recommendation there. To the companies that want to work with DAO, I would say human-centered design. I take tremendous joy bringing IT folks into manufacturing environments. And saying, look at how the plastic in your phone is made, right? Look at what these people do and how they work. What you're trying to sell me isn't going to work for this person. So let's figure out how, from the beginning in your design process, to make it work for those types of heavy manufacturing individuals. Because again, it goes back to the barrier of entry, winning the culture war is higher if you already have a device that is going to be difficult to get adoption and success from. So I can't beat that drum enough, right? Human-centered design around the hardware and fixing the foundations.
Absolutely, and I would beat that drum with you happily. Excellent. Well, thank you all for joining us today. Thank you to AES and Brain Exchange for putting on a great show so far, and thank you to our panelists.